Hello modelers, so in this episode I'm going to compare pre-shading versus black basing. Pre-shading, put a grey primer down, pre-shade your panel lines with some black paint, and then chuck your base coat on. Simple, isn't it? Oh, but now there's a really advanced method, it's a fad. Black basing, prime it in black, and then you put your base coat down in two layers, a marble layer, relatively thin, and then a misty layer on top. I'm going to compare both methods. We're going to use this Mustang as a paint mule. We're going to see how long it takes. We're going to see how much paint I use, and we're going to see how hard it is. Basic tools we'll use for priming, black and grey, we'll use the Evolution with a bigger needle. For the base coats and pre-shading, we'll use the Infinity with a small needle, and we'll use the stopwatch to make sure it's all kosher. So let's start. We're going to do the pre-shading method first, and then compare it to black basing afterwards. We're going to start by priming the left wing in Steiner Res Grey. I find priming in grey can be a little bit slow because you've got to make sure you cover all the grey, but it should take about 3 minutes. Now we're on to pre-shading the panel lines. I'm going to use Tamiya XF1 flat black. It's a little bit pre-thinned. I'll use the Infinity with a 0.2 needle to get those nice panel lines. The pre-shading is almost done. As you can see, we try to get some nice lines. It takes 5 minutes to do that, including cleaning the colour cup out. And we're back onto the base coat. Now I'm going to use Guns RLM 65 because it shows up nicely. I'll use a little cup here to measure everything out. That's not UMP thinner, that's Mr. Leveling thinner. I prefer the Mr. Leveling, it's the best thinner on the market. For doing the base coat, I prefer about 40% paint, 60% thinner for this method. That's actually quite thick in my view, which is one of the strikes against doing this method. You use too much paint to cover all the grey. So we measure it out using the pipette. Give it a good stir. I like to mix the paint if I can before I put it in the colour cup and the airbrush. Pre-thin the airbrush a little bit. We're going to put it all in. Probably have to use all of it. And here we go. Now the trick with this method is not to cover all that tedious work you've already done with your pre-shading. So I'm filling in all the panel lines here. This is sped up 4 times. This takes a long time. You've got to cover that grey, you've got to check it, you've got to cover it again, and you've got to be careful to stay in those lines so you don't waste all that pre-shading effort. So I'm constantly going over each panel and making sure that it's not too bad. Now it was a hot day when I filmed this, so sometimes I had to clean the colour cup and just be sure that the spray was okay. We keep going, and we're covering, and we're covering, and we're covering. Try to get a little bit of different effects happening, but the effort is really just to cover that pre-shading. Now this provides a base if you want to afterwards to do some post-shading, but we're not comparing that today. I'm just wanting to compare these two straight methods, and then we're going to add a clay wash at the end, because this is targeted for the average modeler who wants to get a good overall finish at his skill level. So we're almost done, we're getting there. starting to get a nice shadow effect. We're filling in. This has taken 10 minutes to do from start to finish. And we've used up at least a third a cup. So that's the pre-shading done on the left wing, stage 1. Took 18 minutes all up to do that, 3 minutes to prime, 5 minutes to pre-shade and 10 minutes for the base coat. Took about a third, I think, third of a cup of paint and a third a cup of thinner. Now on to stage 2. Stage 2, let's compare black basing. First stage is prime it in black. Stynal Res black again, used in my Evo brush with a bigger needle. I love priming in black because on any surface apart from black plastic, you can see what you're doing. There's no problem about covering the grey. You can get into all those little nooks and crannies and know that you've filled it all up. It only took me 2.5 minutes, a little bit faster with black. And once it's dry, let's add the marble coat. The key with black basing is we're not doing any pre-shading. I mean, the panel lines are black, as you can see, is to put on a relatively thin marble coat layer. And this will take some time to do, about the same time as it takes to do the base coat and pre-shading. What I've mixed there is about 30 to 40%, probably on the 30% side paint, and the rest is thinner. Okay, you want it thin enough that you can do some fine work coming out of the airbrush, but not so thin that you get some spottiness or some tide marks. Now I've sped this up quite a lot because, like I said, it takes 10 minutes to do, but this is really simple stuff to do. Okay, I'll just talk you through this as we go. I'm not really stopping and starting. I'm just moving the airbrush around. I'm filling in the areas. I'm changing it up. I'm completely random on how I spray there. And I'm not trying to cover it all at once. I'm just putting a little bit down, a little bit down. I do some streaking, particularly over the airfoils there, and just start to fill all those panels in. I don't worry about the panel lines. You paint straight over them. Okay. Had a little break here because it was so bloody hot when I filmed this, and when I started up, as you can see, the paint's gone all a bit too thin, so I just need to mix it up a bit. And we're starting to, here we go, starting to get a bit better now. Alright, so we fill it all in, fill those panels in, and it looks absolutely awful right now. I mean, there's the finished pre-shade wing on the left there. Looks completely terrible, doesn't it? But this is great practice if you want to practice your modelling for German Luftwaffe World War II camouflage, and for any other effect, of course. See, with black basing, we don't necessarily just have to put the base color down here. You could stop here and add some yellows, some tans, some greens, some browns in certain areas, or even certain panels, and that can give you a lovely weathering effect before we put the base coat down. But for now, we're just going to use the one color. This is a very simple technique. It's just a case of slowly bringing up the opacity, filling in the black, which you can see so simply compared to painting on grey, and that's taken 10 minutes to do. We've used less than a quarter of a cup of paint and about half a cup of thinner, so it uses far less paint for the other method. The final coat is where it all comes together, and you don't need to add any more paint. We're just going to thin that mixture down a little bit. We'll just mix it inside the cup. There's a little bit of paint left in there. Like I said, you don't need much at all. You're mainly spraying thinner at this point, so you're probably down to 10% paint, 15%, something like that, depending on your environmental conditions. So I'm just checking there to see if it's okay, giving the tip a bit of a wipe. It was still 30 degrees plus when I was filming this. And we slowly mist the final coat on. Now this is where this method has its detractors, because they say, oh, you know, if you go too far, you'll ruin all that lovely marbling work you've done. Yep, absolutely 100% correct. So don't do it. Just like with pre-shading, don't ruin your pre-shading by painting too much. So you have to have an element of control, and it might take you 1 or 2 times for you to realise, oh, I should have done another coat, or I've gone too far. You'll find that when you add gloss coats on top of this for your decals, and also when you add further weathering, so you may want to do not just a simple clay wash, you might want to do some enamel panel line washes, you might want to do some oils and other effects, that it'll blend in. You might be afraid there's too much modeling or marbling there, but you just need to give it a go once or twice. And already you can see the comparison with the other side. The other side looks pristinely clean, and in my opinion, not very realistic looking. This is looking grubby, looking dirty, look like faded paint. It's looking like it's been put on and it's starting to wear away. You can decide at what stage you want to stop. At this stage, you can decide to fill in a panel to make it a replacement panel, perhaps. It's all up to you what you want to do. This stage only takes a few minutes. I'm filming this in 1x speed. It takes about 3.5 minutes, I think, to do the final coat. It's not hard at all. We're almost done. I'm just having a look at it, letting it dry off, checking it under different light conditions to see how it's going there. You've still got a little bit of pre-shading there if you notice, especially on the flaps, and of course on the ejection ports for the guns. And that's the beauty of this technique. If you still want pre-shading, you've got it. It's there, it's done when you're primed. But I'll add my thoughts to pre-shading at the end here. So we're almost finished. Just giving that one final coat. And you'll find when I do the gloss coat later that what you can see there on the camera with a lot of modelling and marbling that's still evident disappears. Again, experience. You just need to do it a couple of times and you'll work it out. Same with pre-shading. And we're all done. So the black basing is done, we're finished. Took 16 minutes. Used less than a quarter cup of paint. That's less time and less paint for pre-shading. And in my view, looks a lot better. Let's go to the next stage.
Alright, put a gloss coat on this overnight, just a heavy coat of Future. Nothing too drastic. As you can see, it's reflecting there in the light, so it's nice and smooth. The gun's paint really doesn't need much of a gloss coat, just a light sand with some micro mesh. We're going to add some wash. Not my favourite wash. I'm trying to use this up because I've got some Flories on order. This is not very good stuff in my opinion. But we'll just give this a light go and we'll see what it looks like with just a simple wash. I mean, what I'm trying to do with this technique is, you know, what is the average modeler going to do? So we won't use enamels or any other sort of weathering techniques. We'll give that a go. Side done. Let's do the pre-shading side. That's already looks like it's got a panel wash from the pre-shading. My biggest gripe against pre-shading for all that time you spend is you can get that effect anyway with enamels afterwards when you finish your painting. And as I showed with the timeline on how long it took, pre-shading takes twice as long as it does to spray the actual base coat, so you're not saving any time pre-shading. You could use that time better to be more careful with your post-painting weathering, which is where you're actually going to get all the effects. Anyway, we'll let that dry for a bit and wipe it down and see what's what. Alright, that's all dry now, that wash. I'm going to just use a little bit of water here and a napkin tightly folded up. Just damp to get rid of most of the moisture. And let's just wipe it off with aircraft. We try to do it in the direction of the airflow. Most of it off on that side. So that should be barely damp. You can lick it if you want to. Okay, we'll just wipe off on the pre-shaded side. You can see how you're getting some streaking effects if you want, but to be honest, most of that wash has sort of disappeared into the pre-shaded panel lines already. So on the other side, we're getting a bit more variance. I'll just give it another wipe there. I mean, to me, might give that another application, but that looks a lot more realistic. Maybe not as much contrast, but that looks quite stark to me. You've got three very basic colours coming out there. That to me looks a lot more subtle.
So after everything's dried, look at the pre-shaded side with the clay wash, and we look at the black basing side with the clay wash. And if we leave it at that, in my opinion, that side looks better. You still here? Still listening? Still watching? That's good, thank you. Look, the purpose of this video was to compare what is the better method for the beginning or average modeler. I've shown that black basing takes less time, it takes less paint, and about the same skill set to do pre-shading. Because to do that marbling and the mottling, you need to have a steady hand, same steady hand as you do to pre-shade. It also allows you to do further effects if you want to, or you can just leave it as that, put a clay wash on, call it a day. Now, in my mind, contrast wins competitions and hearts. That's why pre-shading is so popular. That's why you see pre-shaded and post-faded, or the so-called quilting you see in most aircraft these days, particularly aircraft. That's the sort of thing that draws your eye in and makes you go, wow, that really pops, that looks really cool. It does, it looks fantastic, but it doesn't look like the real thing in my opinion. You look at the Spitfire we're looking at here, that tail is just marbled and mottled to hell. There's streaks, there's fading, there's everything. The real world, from World War II, World War I, Vietnam, civilian aircraft, everything. There is so much tonal variability, I should say, and there's so much going on. So black basing to me is a superior technique. It's not a fad, it's been used for years. You can change it, you can modify it to your own purposes like I suggested in the video, or just use it as a standard technique. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to see any more of my videos, that's my first one, I hope it was okay. Like or leave a comment, and